So, have you ever sat in a waiting room just staring at the clock, feeling like 5 minutes has stretched into an absolute eternity? Right? We've all been there. But then, when you look back at, say, the last 10 years of your life, it feels like they just vanished in the blink of an eye. It's this wild, universal paradox. Why do minutes crawl, but decades just completely fly by? Well, today we're going on an investigative journey to figure exactly that out. We're going to start from the very cognitive foundations of how your brain actually processes a single second, all the way up to the massive macro systems in our society that are quite literally accelerating our lives. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring the elasticity of time from the mind to the machine. We're going to unpack some truly fascinating evidence-based research drawn from cognitive neuroscience, decision theory mathematics, and critical sociology. Let's dive right in and see exactly how our minds warp time and how modern technology might actually be weaponizing that very phenomenon against us. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the psychology of felt time. To really get this, we first need to understand a concept called felt time. This is essentially our subjective perception of time passing. And the research of cognitive neuroscientist Mark Whitman shows something really surprising. This feeling is actually rooted in our bodily awareness. It has almost nothing to do with the objective tick-tock of a clock on the wall. It's all about your consciousness and your internal bodily signals dictating how fast reality feels. Think about it. When you're highly aware of yourself, say you're incredibly bored, or you're stuck waiting for a delayed train, your awareness of your own bodily state is suddenly heightened, and time just brutally drags. Whitman offers this absolutely brilliant insight. He says, time that is truly felt consists of moments of fulfillment. When you are in what we call a flow state, when you're completely absorbed in a complex task, playing a sport, or just having an amazing deep conversation, your self-focused consciousness drops away. You literally lose that hyper-awareness of your physical body, and as a result, your subjective sense of time just compresses. You lose track of time because, you've essentially stopped tracking yourself. The actual mechanics behind this in the brain are fascinating. Our brains basically operate on these roughly 3-second intervals. These little 3-second chunks are literally the building blocks of our subjective time. So when we're forced to wait, our expectations for what should be happening in those 3 seconds aren't met. When that happens, our brain fires off this predictive error signal. And that agonizing little error signal, repeating over and over and over again, that's what makes waiting in line feel so unbearable. It literally stretches our perception of minutes. Which naturally brings us to Section 2, the mathematical bias of time. This leads to a really interesting cognitive flaw known as the telescoping effect. You see, human beings are notoriously bad at placing events on an objective timeline. We universally tend to overestimate how much time has passed since very recent events, meaning something that happened yesterday can genuinely feel like a week ago. But on the flip side, we constantly underestimate the time passed since distant events. Something from 5 years ago might feel like it was just last year. It's a lot like looking for a telescope. Distant objects suddenly appear way closer than they actually are. So, why does this telescoping effect even happen? Well, decision theory explains this mathematically using something called the Hurwitz optimism-pessimism criterion. But the core concept is actually beautifully simple. Our brain basically calculates the utility, or the emotional weight of our memories. And over time, that emotional weight naturally fades away. Because our brains rely on that emotional intensity as a sort of bookmark for time, the fading utility forces a biased perception. As a memory loses its emotional punch, our internal timeline physically warps, making those distant past events feel deceptively close. So how does this play out over a whole lifetime? Let's look at Section 3, why adulthood speeds up. Zooming out to our lifespans, the absolute crucial point is this. Routine and a lack of novelty directly lead to memory compression. Think back to childhood for a second. It is absolutely packed with novel milestones, right? Your first day of school, learning to ride a bike, your first kiss. These dense, brand new memories stretch our subjective retrospective time. But adulthood? Adulthood is often highly, highly repetitive. When your brain processes the exact same commute and the exact same workday over and over, it doesn't bother storing 1,000 distinct memories. It just compresses them into one big block. That shrinking autobiographical memory load is exactly what makes the years just fly by. And we actually have the data to prove this compression effect beautifully. A major Geneva study mapping out adults aged 20 to 59 found a really stark divide. The data clearly shows that adults who are actively raising children feel the last decade passed significantly faster than adults of the exact same age who don't have children. Why the big difference? Well, it's because of what parenting fundamentally does to your daily life. It brings an intense amount of routine combined with incredibly high time pressure. Juggling school schedules, enforcing bedtimes, managing work duties, it creates a highly structured, highly repetitive environment. That sheer time squeeze heavily compresses your autobiographical memory. As the saying goes, the days are long, but the years are short. And that is directly because of routine and time pressure. Okay, let's zoom way out now. Section 4, Technology and Social Acceleration. Expanding our lens to the macro level, sociologist Hartmut Rosa outlines 3 clear systems of social acceleration that really define modern life. First, there's technical acceleration, just the sheer raw speed of our technology and travel. Second, the acceleration of social change. Think about how incredibly quickly cultural trends, skills, and memes just become completely obsolete now. And third, the acceleration of the pace of life itself, that nagging feeling that we are constantly trying to compress more actions into less and less time. Rosa argues that this combination forces society into a state of what he calls frenetic standstill. Basically, we are moving faster than ever before, but we feel completely paralyzed by the gravitational weight of it all. Within our digital landscape, academic media theorist Christian Fuchs frames this through a pretty critical structural lens. He points out that social media platforms present themselves to us as these benevolent, fun spaces for community connection and play. But structurally, Fuchs argues this is actually a mechanism where our personal time and attention are being commodified. They're turned into user data to be sold for profit. It's an environment that literally demands our constant, accelerated participation. This leads us to a really wild concept from theorist Dominic Petman called hypermodulation. He defines this as the distraction and synchronization of the subject via algorithmically determined feeds. Now, remember Whitman's 3-second cognitive intervals we talked about earlier? Hypermodulation exploits those exact natural rhythms. These platforms distract us with rapid-fire microbursts of content, essentially keeping us synchronized to the machine's pace rather than our own natural bodily awareness. The end result of this hypermodulation is that social media heavily fragments our social reality. Think about your typical scrolling session. You might see a genuinely tragic news story, followed instantly by a funny cat video, followed by a targeted ad for shoes. This chaotic, rapid-fire stream of micro-events completely flattens our emotional states. It leaves us disoriented, totally disconnected from any cohesive narrative, and constantly refreshing our screens to chase the next 3-second dopamine hit, just to relieve that agonizing waiting error signal in our brains. So, we know the problem. How do we fix it? Let's look at Section 5, Strategies for Digital Deceleration. Since we've diagnosed the issue, how do we actually fight back? Well, we can start through conscious deceleration. On a personal psychological level, practicing mindfulness is huge. It anchors your attention in the present moment, which actually dilates time and counters that autopilot mode. Also, actively breaking up your daily routines with intentional novelty forces your brain to store new memories, which literally slows down the perceived passage of your adult years. On a broader societal level, researchers propose digital socialism strategies. This means consciously limiting the data we share, actively reducing our screen time, and supporting alternative cooperative digital platforms that aren't inherently built on extracting our attention for profit. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a real question to chew on. Are you managing your time, or is the algorithm managing you? Understanding how your brain naturally feels time, how your fading memories warp it, and how modern digital platforms actively exploit it, that is the very first step to taking back control. By stepping out of the routine and consciously anchoring into the present, you can ensure those flying decades are actually filled with moments you truly feel. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Now go out there and make your time your own.